Hi, everyone. I'm Fran Costigan, the Director of Vegan Pastry at the Rouxbe Online Culinary School, and I'm here to welcome you today to a very special live event. I want to welcome all the Rouxbe students, grads, and current EVD students, welcome, and guests. It is my absolute pleasure today to introduce Ori Zahar as our special as our special guest for our live. I'm so excited that I'm twisting my words. Ori is the co-founder and co-CEO of Burlap and Barrel, the spice company that's shaking up the industrial spice trade by working with small farmers around the world to offer single origin spices. You may have seen Ori and his partner Ethan on Shark Tank. I didn't, but I've heard about it. And how I came to know about Burlap and Barrel is that a dear friend and colleague and Rouxbe grad, Dory Passon, gifted me some cinnamon from Burlap and Barrel, and I was absolutely blown away by the fragrance and what these spices did to my food compared with others that I had been using. And so I got myself a whole bunch. And also, many of you who follow me know that I care a lot about sustainability. So for me, this company really checks all the boxes that I'm interested in. There's a huge amount of detail on the website about sourcing, working directly with the farmers, and I'm very interested in the idea of terroir with spices. You know, we've talked about that with wine and chocolate and extra virgin olive oil, fruits and vegetables. And it's about time that somebody was thinking about this with spices. I rely on spices for my food, obviously for my dishes. I want everything to be as delicious as possible, both savory and sweet, but also spices are different spices have health benefits. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to, before I turn the mic over to Ori to tell us more about the company, I just want to do a minute housekeeping here and remind you that questions can be entered in the box on the right of your screen. And so if you haven't already sent in a question, or you have a question about a question that's been asked and the answer, just pop in a question. And for my Rouxbe students, welcome to the new group, the new cohort. And remember that everyone here, not just students, everyone here can feel free to email me at fran@rouxbe.com. For students who might encounter a technical problem, it happens sometimes, write to support@rouxbe.com and someone from our fabulous team will get back to you. So now, Ori, I'd like you to speak for yourself and tell us something about your company and whatever it is you'd like to tell us before we get to our questions.
Okay, amazing. Fran, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here and join me in this little kitchen that I'm sitting in here to talk about spices and all that. But for those that may not know us, our company is called Burlap and Barrel. We're a single origin spice company and we're a social enterprise. And so what that means is that, like coffee and tea and chocolate, when you're able to trace something all the way back to origin, you're able to get a higher quality, well-sourced version of that. So much of the ingredients in our kitchens come through like a black box in terms of sourcing, where often farmers and not just farm, but thousands of farmers kind of crops are kind of mixed together, oftentimes across seasons, across qualities, across all that. And it's just made into like a plain, simple kind of commodity product that's always there. We've learned that we get better products when we go to the farmer's market. We learn that we get better products when we know our butcher, when we know our cheesemonger. This is vegan, so we're not going to go in those areas right now. But in general, that we just go straight to origin. We get really higher quality stuff. It's happened in coffee and tea and cacao. We're now doing that for spices. And so the way that our company works is that we work to find these really incredible, entrepreneurial, wonderful smallholder spice farmers. They're specialists, they know what they're doing, and often they're multi-generational farmers, and they're growing really incredible versions of these spices. We work to set them up to be their own direct exporter. So rather than sending someone else to clean, dry, grind, blend, export, we work with them to do that whole process themselves. And the result is that we get really incredible, really flavorful spices. People compare it to when you've had that apple from the farmer's market after you've had apples from the grocery store that have been in cold storage for 6 months. That's the difference between our spices. And now we're turning 8 next month. So we've been doing this for a while now. We import spices from 27 countries. We sent more than $3.5 million in payments to our partner farmers, and we've been getting into stuff beyond just spices. So our most famous, as Fran mentioned, that's our cinnamon. That really is what kind of opens people's eyes to what single origin spices can taste like. But now we're not just doing single spices from all over the world. We're now starting to do origin blends. So spices grown and blended at origin. We'll get to that. We'll talk about that. But talk about terroir. We have the only herbs de Provence from herbs grown in Provence. It's just spices have gotten so separated from origin and how they grow. And so that's what we're fixing. We're connecting. We're creating a direct connection between the farmer, the plant, the farming methodologies, all the way over to your kitchen. And you're going to be rewarded with much stronger flavors, much more interesting flavors, and much better spices in your kitchen. So thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to talk all about spices. Don't hold back with your questions. Let's dig into it. And I'm excited for what we'll chat about in the next hour.
Yeah, thank you, Ori. That was really interesting to me. I use the herb de Provence, and I had noticed that all the herbs actually come from Provence. Your spices are powerful. So, I had some side-by-side comparisons, and I was buying decent, good spices, non-irradiated and so on. But I found it important to use a smaller amount of your spices to start, because they are so potent and wonderful. And for some time now, I've been really interested. I'm interested in mixing and matching mixing flavors that some people think are a little bit out of the box, but I love sweets with savory. And so many of these spices really work for me. I don't have a palate that enjoys spicy food, for example, and I was starting to like ancho chili, but I've started using the Urfa chili, which is smoky and sweet and spicy. For example, in ganache, it's fabulous. And what I do when I'm thinking about how I want to flavor something is, whether it's a pot of soup or a sauce or a pudding, I take a small amount of what I've made, put it in a bowl, a separate little bowl, and start adding spices to the little bowl before I put it in what I call the mother bowl to see how it works. And it's such a fun thing to do. And when I start with just a little bit, if something didn't work, I didn't waste a lot, or I know how to fix it. Now, for example, where is it here? Some people are familiar with my orange tahini truffles. I use Sum tahini, and this is a recipe that I've been making for a long time. It's in my cookbook, Vegan Chocolate, and I make the mixture and coat the truffles with sesame seeds. Well, this time I made the mixture and I had all these beautiful spices, and I started thinking how I could change it up. And I want to tell you, this is my new favorite thing in the world. So to the mixture, I added, it's orange juice and tahini, chocolate, of course, because it's a truffle. This is really great after a Middle Eastern meal. And I usually, and some agave, I've started to add some date syrup, but I always do it with a half recipe. Anyway, this time I added some of the ginger, and I thought, what goes with ginger? And I added a little bit of cinnamon, turmeric, and then coated the truffles with lemon and a dot of the ginger. And I want to tell you, these are fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And that's a way you can start thinking about doing something. It's just a wonderful thing to do. It's fun. And, you know, I have my favorite spices, my pantry spices that I might use all the time. But once you start thinking in terms of combination, it's really great. So, Ori, let's start with some questions. Sheila D is asking, what are your favorite spices for each season?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just by the way, in general, baking, I think spices are really great because they can reinvent dishes without messing with like the liquid ratio, or you can kind of take similar recipes and make many different versions of it. So,
That's
um,
exactly right. And I love to do that. Absolutely love to do that.
So I'll tell you, like some of my favorite spices, now that we're in kind of late summer, I mean, I love what Fran said about kind of moderating flavors, but I have some spices here just off screen. So let's talk about it. So like this black garlic, it's whole, sorry, black lime. These are whole limes that are dried in the sun. The regular green limes, as they dry, they oxidize, they turn black, and they get ground into a powder. These are also called Persian limes or Omani limes. But this is really like sour, tart, a little savory. And so specifically with sweetness, I really like this as a kind of like moderating impact on sweetness. So like that's a really nice thing to in sorbets and things like that. And so what I really like with the black lime is, especially at the end of the summer, I just put a little bit of this on fruit, maybe a little bit of salt, and it's really beautiful. And so I like that with all the summer fruits to kind of moderate the sweetnesses. On the other side of it, savory, um, I like this also in the falls. We get the savory, earthier flavors, all that. This is our sun-dried tomato powder. So these are tomatoes that are just extra sun-dried and ground into a powder. Really earthy, really savory, like an umami bomb. And then just to get into the winter, while we're getting into things, there's two things that I really love. I just happen to have these here, but this buffalo ginger that Fran mentioned, it's a Vietnamese bigger ginger. It's called buffalo because it's like the animal, like it's a bigger ginger. They call it buffalo locally there. It's actually quite spicy and brings some heat. So this really feels like a warm hug. Like it's warming. It's got some of those sweet flavors, but the heat really cuts through. And then the last one that I'll just share here is we have had something that's been really, really popular. It's called, we call it Nyanza vanilla powder. It's from Tanzania by Lake Victoria, which was traditionally called Lake Nyanza. Now, just to give you a little illustration of the spice world, often vanilla powder is made for twice used vanilla. So first they'll take vanilla beans and they'll make an extract out of it. Then they'll take that vanilla and make a sugar out of it, a vanilla sugar. They'll soak it, and then they'll grind those beans down. What we do is we get these vine ripened vanilla beans, and they're considered split beans. They're considered lower quality in the industry because when something gets really ripe, we've seen this all in fruit, fruit will split. This is actually the most flavorful, highest sugar moment of that fruit's life. And so people want their like beautiful vanilla beans. We take the split beans that are the most flavorful, and then we dry them out and grind them into a powder. And so each of these, we call these our mini jars. They're our half-size jars. This has 6 whole vanilla beans in it ground, and it's just really versatile. Its flavor is best when you cook it with some heat. The flavor comes out, but you can also just sprinkle it on things and use it in cookies and bonbons and things like that. So just a few of my favorites right now in the moment and as I go through the seasons. But that's one of the really cool things is that you can take a recipe that Fran taught you, and then just by changing the spices around, you can make it appropriate to different weather, different cuisines, and different seasons.
That's really interesting. A lot of that was interesting. I held up the tomato powder because I we have a lesson in Ruby Plant Pro in making powders like this, but I know my friend and colleague Kathy Gold used to talk about using tomato powder a lot, and I love this. In the summertime, I like a watermelon and tomato salad, for example, and then I marinate some tofu instead of feta, which is the usual on a regular. I use this tomato powder. It was crazy. It's fabulous when you're making fruit salads. And I did the cobbler that is in the course with fruit. I did berries and cherry tomatoes, spent those little yellow, really sweet cherry tomatoes with a bunch of savory spices was fabulous. And as Ori said, when you're adding spice to a batter, you're not changing the liquid ratio. I mean, you're not going to use a ton. So that really is Terrific. And when I was thinking, going back to these truffles, I was thinking about why I would use ginger. It made sense to me. If I'm getting a little cold or any kind of under the weather, I reach for ginger. It's one of my favorite spices. Lauren, hi Lauren. Lauren has a really interesting question. I've wondered about, what Ori would have to say about this. And Lauren is asking, are there any spices that are a must toast when you're using them in cuisine?
Yeah, so toasting spices is a really nice way of kind of reviving spices. So, like toasting, applying a little bit of heat to them, ends up bringing the essential oils back out to the surface, kind of enhancing the fragrance and all of that. I find that with fresher spices, you don't often need toasting, doesn't bring them alive as much. They're already there. But particularly seeds and things like that, like it's really nice to toast kind of the seed spices a little bit more. They're a little bit hardier, but one big watch out is that I've had people that are trying to toast spices, they'll burn the spices because, especially as you have these finely ground spices, you put them under high heat, you're not paying attention. Please start over. Don't try to fix it. Get rid of those spices, start toasting again, because once you start getting into the burnt territory, it's really hard to recover from those. Like those smoky flavors are so and burnt flavors, not just smoky. You want smoky, try the smoked paprika. It's beautiful. But the second you burn the spices, it's a really hard thing to come back from. So don't be mad. Just dump it out and try again. But toasting does do really wonders, and particularly on seeds and particularly on whole spices. It helps to bring things back out to the surface.
Amen to paying attention. I've been there. And if I'm in a different part of my apartment and my apartment's not that large and I am smelling the nuts toasting, it's over. So,
Totally.
be with your food. I actually just very lightly, standing right there with the pan and watching the pan, toasted some of your nigella seeds. That's a flavor that I just really love.
Totally.
I've always loved flatbreads with the nigella seed, and I wanted to see if it would make a difference to toast them. So I did a very small amount. Again, I didn't want to waste. I didn't think I would have a problem with them because I was watching them.
Hmm.
And I didn't notice too much of a difference, but they are so delicious by themselves. So here's a question from Dory, and Dory Passon, Ruby graduate, a good friend of mine. She actually is the woman who gave me my first gift of burlap and barrel spices. And Dory wants to know, what's the best way to store your spices to extend their shelf life?
So, first of all, cheers to you, Dory, and thank you for that. And if you reach out to us, we'll send you some more spices as a thank you for sharing the love. Um, so, a lot of people ask about storing spices, and some people, there are always challenges with the different methods of storing. And let me just talk through this. The general rule is light, moisture, heat, and time are all the four factors that will degrade the quality of your spices, including other foods, but spices, people tend to keep them for a lot longer. Herbs are a little more sensitive to losing their flavor over time. And in general, ground spices are more sensitive to losing their flavor versus whole spices, because kind of when you grind them, you increase the surface area. And so, if you can grind your spices fresh, keep them around. But what we've found is that most of the spices in your grocery store, their best days are long behind them. And so, like, they've been through so much, farmers are often really pushed down on price, forcing them to kind of cut costs and cut corners and pick underripe spices. They'll sit in warehouses for months and years before they get to you. And so, I was recently at a large retailer that I will not name, and I looked at their peppercorns, and the country of origin was 5 countries. And so, what you're getting from there is it's already it's lost its luster. And so in general, sure, store your spices out of direct sunlight. Some people like to store their spices in their fridge. The only downside of that is that as you bring them in and out, temperature fluctuations can cause moisture to kind of set in, and then you're going to risk your spices molding or just losing their kind of flavor. Some people store them in their deep freezer. That's okay for kind of long-term storage, but just anything where you're changing temperatures has the potential to cause condensation, and now you're introducing moisture. It's the same thing actually when you like shake your spices over boiling pots. you can also like add moisture and condensation, which isn't great. My my rule of thumb is I always pick 2 or 3 spices that I want to bring into rotation. I keep them by my stove. I keep them out because nothing's getting better in the dark corners of your pantry. And so my biggest recommendation is just use your spices, engage with them. I think we in America in general, ask most cultures around the world, we tend to underspice. And so I'd say turn it up, use it, take some spices that you want to focus on and want to experiment with, keep them out right next to you. They'll find their way into your cooking because you're seeing them because they're out, and that definitely is much better. Like when I moved before this whole company, what did I know about spices? We can go into that whole story, but I literally moved with my spices. I had bay leaves that I bought in like the giant quart container that lasts you for probably a few lifetimes, and I moved with them. The point is that we're often much better off with smaller quantities of fresher spices that are used regularly in rotation. So if you can encourage that, you'll find that you're spicing things up more.
Right. I did an event sometime earlier about spices or using ingredients, not having waste. And there were I got a lot of teasing from people, even memes, because I was like, sniff your spices. If they don't smell like anything, what do you expect? They're not going to add
Definitely.
anything. But I do what Ori is talking about. I have certain spices that are in very regular rotation. I have them near my stove, not right at it, but near it. And I keep the ones I like on a turntable on my island and near my stove. And those are the ones I use the most. I think it's best not to buy quantity.
Yeah.
So that's great. Oh, JN, I have a feeling based on this question that's Jill Nussenau, the veggie queen, wants to know what kind of wonderful things can I do with the cardamom extract? I love grinding cardamom seeds and using that on top of my steel cut porridge mix. So I happen to have run into Jill. We're longtime friends. Her book, Vegan Under Pressure, because you can see behind me there's a lot of Rancho Gordo beans, and her pressure cooker book is fabulous. And I was thinking about the cardamom extract. That's what led me to meet Ori at the Fancy Food Show. I went and I saw the Burlap and Barrel booth, and I said, cardamom extract, I haven't seen that before. And coincidentally, my kids, they're all adults. Many of you know that I'm a grandma, had come back from Sweden. And my son said, Mom, the cardamom that's used is so amazing. So I've been using the extract with vanilla extract or with almond extract or by itself. And it adds such a gorgeous flavor. So I would say, Jill, use it just like any other extract. What would you say, Ori?
Totally. And we love Rancho Gordo, and the beans are a big part. I'm a proud Bean Club member myself, and so I totally get it. The cardamom extract came out of almost like an accident. We had more cardamom seeds than we knew what to do with, and so we ended up reaching out to our friends at Bitter Cube Bitters and asked them if they could help us. A bitters company, what are they doing other than extracting flavors? And so we sent them the cardamom, as you can see, Fran was holding there.
Yeah.
And they made this really beautiful extract out of the cardamom that's got this like kind of golden yellow flavor. So totally agree with you, Fran. Anywhere you use vanilla extract or almond extract, try to sub it out for cardamom extract and see what happens. It's a really nice kind of like twist on something. But I also really like it. Throw a few dabs in coffee. Throw a few dabs in just anywhere where you think you could use a little bit of like, I love cardamom flavor in general, primarily like in sweets, but and cardamom buns and all that. But just try to amp it up a little bit in anywhere in cakes and desserts, in
Yes.
puddings and all that. It'll integrate really nicely. And it is an alcohol-based extract. Be aware it's 40% alcohol. And so it's not to say that you're going to use enough to really make your morning coffee into something that you didn't mean it to be, but a few dabs will go a long way. But especially as you bake something or cook something, the alcohol pretty quickly cooks off. And so then
Right.
you're just left with this pure, deep cardamom flavor.
That's important to know. Well, I agree with you on everything except the coffee. I don't like any flavors in my coffee. No, nothing.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Kathy G. And Kathy is my literal neighbor, 2 floors below me, owner of a renowned culinary school, knows so much. She's a real culinarian and the president of Les Dames d'Escoffier International. And Kathy's asking, please tell us about your cinnamon, the royal cinnamon and the cinnamon tree leaves especially. And she has a request for you, Ori. Please bring back the spiced sprinkles. So,
Ooh, we're
yeah.
working on it. Yeah. So for those that don't know, we worked with Malier to do a series of spice sprinkles. We've been trying to get the flavor just right in these sprinkles, and so we've been working hard to bring them back. And so fingers crossed, we'll have those back. Um, I see you have some sprinkles over there, Fran. Is that what you're holding up?
No,
Or are you
I'm
holding up
holding
other
up
wonderful spices?
my almost empty cinnamon verum
Yeah.
and royal cinnamon.
So
And I
royal
use
cinnamon,
them differently. I use
please.
them differently. They have different flavors. The verum goes on my morning oats. I was told that, or I learned that cinnamon can help regulate blood sugar. But I know that isn't it there's just a different, and the royal or Vietnamese is stronger in flavor. They have different flavor profiles. So depending on
Yeah.
what I'm making, I choose one or the other. But
Yeah, absolutely.
there's been a
And
lot of recalls about cinnamon
oh,
lately.
yeah, totally. So just to address that, because I know it's on top of everyone's mind, cinnamon naturally can get lead in it. It's from car exhaust near where it's drying. It's from all kind. It's all from kind of human activity. The cinnamon ends up soaking it up, and it ends up showing up in the cinnamon. The guidance from the industry is basically under 1 part per million. And recently, Consumer Reports has been testing lots of different cinnamons for that, and many are coming above. We test all of our cinnamon. All of ours is well below 1 part per million. Otherwise, we wouldn't sell it. But I think this is what happens from when you don't know where spices are going. How is there lead in turmeric? How is there lead in cinnamon? Like these are all things that have just, yeah, it's all through these really long supply chains. They're sitting around. Maybe they're using a gas, powered machine to grind them or to pack them or whatever. They all start getting lead infused in them because it's all of man-made things. Maybe they're being dried by the road. And so lead ends up being a lot more in our foods than we intend to, but a lot of it is then hidden by like layers and layers of intermediaries between where they grow and where it comes to you. And so we test and we're very careful about it. And this is just another case for working with single origin suppliers and just in general trusted suppliers that work with the farmers and can make sure that there's that kind of cleanliness and safety built in. But we test all of our turmerics, we test all of our cinnamons and all the other spices that have any risk of lead getting into them to make sure that what we get is different. Now, Fran, as you were saying, there's a few different kinds of cinnamon. So one is the cinnamon verum, which is I think a good like kind of marketing in Latin. Cinnamon verum, true cinnamon. There are multiple kinds of cinnamon. This one is called true cinnamon, but you'd be hard to argue that one is truer than the other. Cinnamon is tree bark, and I know that Patrick has some photos of the cinnamon tree bark. If you'd like to bring those up. So this is a photo that we took, my business partner and I, in Vietnam. This is literally them removing the bark from a cinnamon tree. The outer bark is bitter, and so that gets shaved off. And then the inner bark is really what gets powdered down into cinnamon. You can see the farmer kind of naturally curls here. Cinnamon sticks, as you can imagine, are younger bark, so smaller, thinner bark. As it dries, it kind of curls into that classic cinnamon stick shape, but it's from younger bark. And the reason why cinnamon is more flavorful as it grows is when you bring in bark from 10, 15-year-old trees. And we were spending time in Vietnam, we saw that parents would plant cinnamon trees for their children to harvest. And so it's really not in these same time frames that we expect. It's almost like a saving account. It's almost like an asset saying, here you go, wait until the cinnamon is 10 years old, 15 years old, and you'll be able to sell it for even more when you bring down the trees. The wood is used for firewood, the wood is used for furniture and all kinds of things like that. But the farmers take great care to plant as they cut down and to replace and to keep growing because these are their assets. And so it's a really beautiful thing of this really tree bark that we're eating, this flavorful tree bark that's really beautiful. So cinnamon verum, the cinnamon verum that's traditionally the Sri Lankan cinnamon, that's where it's native to. We bring ours from Zanzibar, where it's also been planted and grown, and that's a much less sweet cinnamon. It's known for its medical properties, and it's also the classic cinnamon that's in like Mexican cuisine, that's in savory dishes, because it's not overpoweringly sweet. It's a much more balanced cinnamon. It's citrusy. It has a little bit of like salinity to it, and it still has that kind of whisper and that kind of flavor of cinnamon, but it's not like red hot. It's not that like classic intense cinnamon that you know. The Vietnamese cinnamon is that. And so that's the total other end of the scale. This thing is sweet. It's got some spiciness to it. And everything that we know is Saigon cinnamon, which, by the way, no cinnamon grows anywhere near Saigon in Vietnam. It was just exported from there. So everybody called it Saigon cinnamon. Most cinnamon in Vietnam is grown in northern Vietnam. It's really the cassia variety, the Chinese traditionally grown cinnamon variety. But what we were able to kind of meet is farmers that were actually growing in central Vietnam the classic different cinnamon. It has a different Latin name. It's cinnamon Luraroi, and it's an even sweeter, even spicier cinnamon. And we called it royal because it was grown near the city of Hue, which was the old traditional capital of Vietnam, where like the royalty was. And so it was served to royalty. It was a cinnamon that was grown and cultivated for royalty. So we called it our royal cinnamon. But this is the knock you over the head, really sweet, kind of spicy cinnamon. And that one is our best seller because everyone loves cinnamon. And this is a really beautiful way to bring a really strong over the top cinnamon flavor into your cooking.
They're both wonderful, and the royal is, but I want to caution people here because, you know, in teaching, I do a fair amount of tasting, as you would imagine. And I had a class when I was teaching in New York, really dedicated students who were dedicated to learning. And there was this, you know, I'm going down the line. I think I was tasting pumpkin pie. And one very fine student had made something that, you know, I always want to be positive, but it was awful. And she just dumped the traditional spices in. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And that really goes with spices. So, you know, go ahead and be cautious about, you can always add more, but you can't take it away too easily. Now, we have a wonderful question and comment from Whole Food Plant-Based Royalty, Charlene Nolan, our Rouxbe instructor. That's only one hat that she wears, and a dear friend, a wonderful person. And Char says, and works with the Esselstyn family. I know there is an Esselstyn family collection of spices at Burlap and Barrel. And of course, I'm very proud that I made Rip Esselstyn's wedding cakes and used more cinnamon because without the fat added, you know, then I needed to boost flavor. So Char says, triple love your products and how your spices are sourced. Is a public benefit corporation the same thing as a B Corp? And congratulations on your good work. Your buffalo ginger is my go-to. Cheers.
Okay, thank you so much. So great question. So we're a social enterprise, and as we were forming our company, we were trying to figure out what the right way was to kind of tie our values and what's important to us to our like kind of business operations. And so there are two ways that are popular: a public benefit corporation and a B Corp. Now, a B Corp is a certification that you get every year based on checking a number of different boxes, and you kind of total up your score. And if your score is above a certain amount, congratulations, you passed the test, you're a certified B Corp. And you work with them to kind of verify it. And they're making sure that anyone says they're a B Corp, they've kind of evaluated the companies and their responses and all that stuff, which is really wonderful. We don't have our B Corp certification, not because we don't respect it, but just because we haven't done it. And in the world of certifications, what we have done for ourselves is we are a public benefit corporation, and we had to reincorporate our company at some point, because what that does is that creates in our company formation, in the way that we're structured, it says that every company has to maximize shareholder value. And, you know, that can create all kinds of bad impacts of, you know, saying who cares about the environment and who cares about these people? The people that own this company are making the most money. And that didn't sit right with us. And so right as we were kind of coming into being, there was this organization of a public benefit corporation, a new formation that said, actually, you're allowed to have two priorities. And that is one, to kind of maximize shareholder value, but an equally important priority is your public benefit. And you can state whatever your public benefit is, but then it's codified into your company's DNA. And our public benefit was to connect smallholder farmers to high value markets. And that's what we do here every day. We make sure that a lot more of the money stays in the pockets of the smallholder farmers rather than intermediaries. And we kind of make sure that then we're able to get really high quality spices, and they kind of work together. Because we're able to pay the farmers more, they're able to grow spices better and without having to cut corners, regeneratively, organically, in all the really different wonderful ways. And so we're a certified public benefit corporation. It's in our DNA, it's in how we do things. And we wanted to make sure that even if, let's say, me and Ethan, my co-founder, are no longer running the company, which we don't have plans to change that, but if we do in some future, that will still be in the company's DNA, and we won't be able to separate ourselves from it. And in fact, our employees, our customers can all literally take us to court if they feel that we are not living up to our public benefit. So we're like, let's put some stakes behind this. Like, let's do it for real and let's code it into our DNA. And that's why we chose to become a public benefit corporation. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of detail about it on the website, on the Burlap and Barrel website. I thought it was really super interesting, and thank you for doing that. So Deborah G is asking me if I have any suggestions about the best way to grind whole nutmeg. She bought a special hand grinder just for this purpose, and it didn't work very well. Well, Deborah, I'm kind of old school. I've had this probably for 15 years. I put a link to a similar one in the Q&A, and this stores a whole nutmeg. And when I want to grind nutmeg, I'm not really grinding it as much as I'm grating it over something, and I find it works fine. So I can't really speak to the grinder that you bought or grinders because I'm not using them. If yours doesn't work very well, I suggest you get something like this. It's super. And there's nothing like the fragrance of freshly grated nutmeg. It's amazing. So here are my nutmegs that I keep in a jar and grate them. I just love it. I love it's so particular, nutmeg. It's just wonderful. Thank you for that question. Mitch has a question and a comment. Hi, Mitch. Mitch is saying, congratulations on the quality of your spices and the sustainability of your work. In the US and EU, regulations limit the use of certain harmful chemicals. How can we know that the spices sourced outside the US do not contain unsafe levels of harmful chemicals?
Yeah, great question. I think health is on everybody's minds these days, and correctly so. And I think spices are, when they rank risk of adulteration, spices are always at the top of the list in terms of supply chains where something happens. Anytime something gets handed off many times, there's always incentive for somebody to adulterate something, increase the weight of it, or mix in wood pulp, mix in all this other stuff. And I think that people are always trying to stay ahead of it, but there's so much adulteration that ends up happening in this world. And spices are particularly prone to it because they typically change hands so many different times. And so spices are definitely a place where you should be more attentive and more watchful. We all know, I think in the US, people have known to look up for irradiation, where often spices were sterilized using irradiation, which means that they would be exposed to radiation, which would kill all the buggers in there. But also people didn't like that their spices, I mean, they weren't glowing, but people didn't like that their spices were exposed to radiation, which makes sense. And a lot of spice companies also will sterilize using ethylene oxide gas. That's called ETO sterilization. The kind of safest sterilization is steam. It has the least amount of it's not exposed to anything else. And so long story short with all this, I think because you don't get to kind of check the supply chain of a lot of the places of where you're getting your ingredients from, you kind of need to trust that you're buying from a company that you do trust and that will do it right and kind of take care of their ingredient and be a good custodian for the quality of what they're bringing to you. The other thing that I've seen is that people are always like, why can't I get a certain retailer's jar of garlic that costs 99 cents? And a good rule of thumb is that producing food well and paying people equitably costs money. And I think sometimes when we find things that are just a price that's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And so I would just be totally just be wary of things that are on super sale. I've been in so many stores where there isn't a single jar of spices over $2. And so where are they cutting corners? How are they saving it? How are they able to get these spices at these really, really low price? Someone is paying the price along the supply chain, and you may be part of the people that are paying the price because of where this came from. So it's really important to trust your companies and your suppliers.
That is a very rich answer, and it's really true. You know, we have to trust our suppliers, and food is expensive. It is, but we want to know that our farmers, our suppliers, are paid well. And again, if you see something, you know, might be if you buy a loaf of day-old bread, which I've done that with Char sometimes. That's okay, but I know who made the bread. But I'm certainly not going to, you know, buy a big thing of spices for 99 cents or $1.99. It doesn't make sense, and I don't want to think about exploitation of the people who are ultimately, you know, not the manufacturers, but the people who are actually in the field. You know, people talk about how expensive bean to bar chocolate is. And I think nobody really that I know says, gee, that bottle of wine cost $5.99. You know, chocolate is a labor-intensive product. What you said, Ori, about the vanilla powder was really interesting to me. That is not something that I knew. And I've used some vanilla powders that have been a little disappointing to me, but I did try yours, and it's fabulous. So that's just a great piece of information to know. One of the things I love about culinary the most is there's always something new to learn. I just love that. So Eugene has a question about making raw vegan desserts such as cakes or pies. He's asking if I've ever used the large persimmons, and if so, which do I recommend for the best texture? Well, Eugene, that's a really interesting question. Thank you for asking it. I don't do a lot of raw desserts, and I haven't to date made one with persimmons, but I've certainly eaten persimmons, and they're kind of particular. People seem to like them or not like them, and I think it has to do with waiting for the different kinds to become ripe. So basically, there are two kinds of persimmons that we see mostly, and if I'm pronouncing them wrong, please forgive me, but fuyu, which are called Japanese persimmons, but grown, I think, in North Carolina, in this country. When they're ripe, they're sweet. They're shaped more like a pumpkin and can be eaten. Those are the ones that can be eaten fresh. So for your raw desserts, that's what I would use. The hachaya persimmons are tart and shaped more like an acorn, and those are the ones that are usually cooked before eating. So they are very tart until they're ripe, and they should be ripe and very soft. They are thought of as baking persimmons, and I think they pair well with cinnamon, nutmeg, and allspice. The other ones, the fuyu, are also tart until ripe, but they take a lot less time to get there, and they're firmer in texture. So I would say, since you're asking about a raw dessert, you want to look at the fuyu persimmons. And you can let me know how it goes. If you have a follow-up question, feel free to send it to me at fran@rouxbe.com. Patrick, this might be an interesting time to show some of the other photos that we got from Ori.
Oh, nice. Well, yeah, we can cue the photo. I figured I'd show you a little bit about how some spices grow, bring you back to the farm, and show you a little bit of that.
Yes.
So this is, we actually have two kinds of chilies. So speaking of chilies that are wonderful, we have two chilies from Turkey. And so this is a photo of the Urfa chili, but its sister chili, which is actually the exact same chili, just processed differently, is called the Aleppo chili or Aleppo style,
Oh.
which we call the silk chili because Aleppo is in Syria and there is not, sadly, much Aleppo chilies coming out of there anymore. And so you can see here, this is a farmer holding these. And so in the kind of area of the Kahramanmaraş in Aleppo, what they would do is they would sun dry these chilies. So they would keep their red color. You would get these kind of really nice, sweet, summery, tomatoey kind of chili flakes, medium heat that are really wonderful. And then the Urfa chili is this like there are these jet black chilies. And so it's the same chili that starts, but instead of drying them in the sun, they kind of dry them under a tarp and they kind of cook in their own juices. And you get these kind of like, they kind of start this almost fermentation process. And so they develop these like chocolatey flavors, raisiny, leathery, tobacco-y flavors, still medium heat but still beautiful. So if you ever want to kind of do a study on, this is nerdy, but if you're ever curious about what post-harvest processing's impact on a spice, the Urfa and silk are really cousins in that they're the same chili, but they're just dried differently, and it develops a really different set of flavors, and it's really interesting. So just wanted to show you that chili and how it starts, and like we were talking about with Fran, the chilies are back-breaking work. Chilies grow at around knee height. You have to really kind of pull them off at the right format. But the reasons why we have so many chilies, from habaneros to super hots to Jimmy Nardellos, is because chili is a highly adaptive spice. Sorry, I'll talk about nutmeg in a second. But chilies are a highly adaptive spice, and depending on the sunlight and the terroir and the soil and all that stuff, they'll adapt to survive. And so you'll get different heat levels and sizes and shapes and all that. So chilies are quite a survivor and quite a versatile crop. And so that's why we have so many different chilies in our arsenal. And they're a really fun thing to play with to figure out the right chili that you love.
Well,
Okay.
nature's just amazing, isn't it? And your description of the Urfa would explain to me why I was very drawn to use it in chocolate ganaches and chocolate pudding and frostings.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's see who knows this next picture. What are we looking at? So Patrick, bring it back. So who knows what this is? Think in your head, tell me what this is if you've ever seen this. If you say it looks like a dragon egg from Game of Thrones, you're correct. But this is actually two spices. And so this is nutmeg. And so what you see here is you see the nutmeg fruit, which is this yellow. It's pretty acidic. It's not very fun to eat. It's tannic, but some places will make candy out of it, and that kind of softens it. Right on the inside, those red veins are mace. And so mace and nutmeg are part of the same fruit. And so the mace gets kind of peeled off, the blades of mace, they get dried, and then you get whole and ground mace out of that. Then there's that shiny black shell that is not edible and doesn't taste like anything. And if you crack that open, the nutmeg seed is inside. That's our partner farmer CEO in Zanzibar holding this. His son now runs his nutmeg farm. But what's really unique about this is that when it's ripe, the nutmeg seed literally splits the fruit, as you can see there in the middle. And that's how you know when it's ready to go. And so that's the nutmeg fruit and where that comes from. And so nutmeg, you get this kind of mentholy, kind of like, I don't know, a tropical, I don't know how Fran you would describe it. We get all these really wonderful flavors out of the nutmeg. And the mace is a little bit like gentler. I don't know. It's a little bit more of like a whisper, and really wonderful in stews and in all kinds of baked goods. And so we're starting to bring in ground nutmeg. Specifically, speaking of how to grind nutmeg, we are starting to bring in ground nutmeg because we've had so many requests for it. We used to have nutmeg in the shell because it keeps really well there, but it kept getting 1-star reviews that it didn't taste like anything, and it was because everyone was grinding the shell and not cracking it. And so we started bringing in nutmeg outside of the shell, and now we're starting to bring in mace, and we want to bring in ground mace too, because it just seems like it makes it a little bit easier for people to use it and means that it more frequently will be in people's cooking. Oh, I think we had 2 more photos from Guatemala, which might be fun. So this is our partner farmer, Don Amilcar. He's a vertically integrated cardamom farmer. The really interesting story about cardamom in Guatemala is that India is where cardamom is native to and grows more cardamom than anywhere else in the world. But Guatemala exports more cardamom than India because India has a lot of export restrictions. And so this is really what a spice farm typically looks like. It's almost closer to agroforestry. where the farmers are really managing almost like a wild forest and cultivating it and taking care of it rather than like rows and rows of crops like you think about other things that are grown. So spices are really grown uniquely. Almost all spice harvesting is done by hand. There's very little machine or animal labor involved in it. And so that's done Amilcar walking into it. But in the early 1900s, a couple of German coffee farmers in Guatemala said, I wonder what else would grow here. And they planted a bunch of stuff, and cardamom was the thing. And that kicked off a massive cardamom industry in Guatemala. And so this is what the cardamom seeds look like before, or the cardamom pods look like before they're dried. And so you have these like kind of plump little, they're like these like above ground seeds almost that grow out of the cardamom. We can talk about this all day long, but this is them in the dryer where they just pushes a little bit of hot air, slowly drying them, and they kind of shrivel into the cardamom seeds that we know and love.
Thank you, Ori. We got a couple of other questions that I want to try to get to. I just want to show people mace. This is mace, which is really fantastic. I love it. And grind it or infuse things. So Melissa's asking, should we be concerned about the country of origin? Melissa, if you go back through, if you look at the, you're going to get a link to the event. You're going to see that Ori has answered that question. Also the one about heavy metals found in cocoa, cinnamon, and spices, even organic brands. And Ori talked about the things that makes that happen, the externals, and again, know who you're buying from. Anne wants to know, do you sell honey, true honey?
Oh my God, do we? We're about to, this is a secret, so let's just keep it here within this group of people. But we've been working really, really hard to launch a line of single origin honeys, and that's coming before the end of October. So stay tuned. Go to burlapandbarrel.com. We have a really wonderful honey program that we're about to introduce. And yeah, honey is a huge issue of adulteration. And also a lot of our partner farmers produce honey. They keep beehives because it helps improve pollination. It helps improve biodiversity. So honey's always been adjacent to spices. And so now give us a month and we're going to have some really, really cool options for honey for you on our site.
Really cool. So many vegans won't use honey, and people have heard me say this before. I watched a film called Queen of the Sun. I mean, I feel that without bees, we don't have a conversation about food. We need the bees. We need to protect the bees. And it's the adulterated honey. You know, if we have farmers, I also had the opportunity to be with indigenous people in the rainforest of Brazil, and their honey was really saving them. So we will look for that. We'll keep it a secret here. We'll keep it a secret.
And just one more vegan point on honey is that what we've learned through this process is that there are many ways to harvest honey. And the folks that we're working with do not harvest the brood stock. They won't take it if there's any bees in it and things like that. So there are very thoughtful, non-bee harming ways of making it hard. If it doesn't fit with your diet, that's totally okay. But we really tried to go as far as we could to make sure this was kind of safe and thoughtfully managed honey.
I am not surprised to hear you say that after having conversations with you and learning about the company. Kathleen has an interesting question that I think that I can answer, and she wants to know what are the best spices to replace salt. Spice in general, using spice in general is gonna oomph up the flavor, but I bought the God's Love We Deliver bundle. Now, it caught my eye because when I lived in New York, and most of you know that I lived in New York, I moved here, I'm very happy in Philadelphia. I did some work with God's Love We Deliver, and this is one of the spices. The spices in that bundle are all salt-free, and they really pack a punch. This is smoke and garlic. It's fabulous. Shar, Nolan, I'm looking at you. I have a gift for you that has to do with this. It's fabulous, and there's a cocoa mixture one with some mesquite that's fabulous. So you want to use spices again. Add them a little at a time until you've got something that you need, and you won't need to worry about salt. Speaking of salt, though, I happen to like the black salt, because when I make a tofu scramble or some kind of a vegan egg thing, egg replacement, I love it. A little bit goes a long way with that. Hermela wants to know, can I buy cinnamon and other spices from your website that is not powder? I like to grind my own spices. I have some cardamom that you grind yourself, but Ori, do you sell cinnamon?
We do have what's called cinnamon quills. They're these hand-rolled cinnamon verum quills from Sri Lanka. They look like scrolls of parchment, and it's a very delicate hand-rolling process to kind of get them to take this really beautiful shape. We've been on the fence with all of that. We try to have whole options for the spices as much as possible, but also a lot of folks just want the easy thing that they're cooking, they like their kids are hungry, like there's already a lot of stuff going on. And so we want to offer the easy solution too that just lets them get cooking with it. So we do have whole spices also that I think you'll like. You can get ground cardamom, you can get whole cardamom, you can get cardamom seeds, you can get cinnamon powder, you can get cinnamon sticks. And so like we're really trying to give all the options there, because for the people that want to grind it themselves, please do. It'll be wonderful. And yeah, we want to enable that.
That's great. Thank you. Nancy says, we've got just a couple more questions, and I want to get to them and stick to the time as much as possible. I've purchased from Burlap and Barrel for several years and love your spices. This is Nancy. Recently, I purchased the ground hibiscus, but haven't used it yet. What have you used it for, Ori?
So, Fran, I think you might have some good ideas here too, but I really like it. It's really great in drinks and in coolers, like especially in the summer and on hot days. We're kind of getting out of that seasons. It's really nice in compotes, like if you're kind of making fruit compotes. I really like it there. And I think it's beautiful. Like we talked about how do you moderate sweetness? And so tartness is a really beautiful way. So like sugar cookies, like think of it almost like where you use citrus, and so that's where the hibiscus does it, but it also gives everything a beautiful magenta color that if you use it for nothing other than color, just so you can cook it with a little bit of water or make a little sauce out of it with a little sugar, it'll give a really beautiful like frosting or anything like that.
I do. I use hibiscus, and our friend, I know many of you follow Dr. Gregor, and he says drink hibiscus tea, make beverages with hibiscus. It's very healthful. But I love the tartness and the color. And Patrick, if you can show the slide of my gel. So in Essential Vegan Desserts, it's all about foundational technique. We're not using eggs, we're not using milk, we're not using butter, no dairy products at all. We're using vegan sweeteners, liquid and granulated, but you have to know what you're doing. So agar-agar is a natural seaweed that has been used for millennia as a gelatinizing agent, and we use that in place of bovine gelatin. And I just yesterday, when I was grading, had a student say for her agar assignment, oh, this is the first time I got it to work. I've been missing these steps. So I'm really teaching you how to use ingredients. But this gel is a perfect example of something that can be varied forever. And it's a gluten-free, no sugar added. It's possible to be no sugar added as well, light and refreshing. So this particular one was done with blueberry and some hibiscus, actually, because I love the brightness. I just love the brightness of it. And then our pastry cream on the top, which I now make also, it's a cashew-based cream, and I make it also, sometimes I remove the vegan cane sugar and use dates. And that's thanks to my daughter-in-law, Linda, who said, can you do that with dates? So I call it Linda cream now. But, there is a lot you can do with that cream. I'll divide it up. It makes about 1.5 cups, the recipe. I divide it up and flavor with, add some different flavor. And I might be adding some hibiscus to it. The color, it's wonderful for the color itself. It really is. So thank you for that question, Nancy. Let us know. Let me know what you do with your ground hibiscus. And the last question is from Maria. And Maria would like to know, Ori, how did you come up with the name Burlap and Barrel?
So when my co-founder and I, we were coming up with all these different names of it, and we got down to the point where we were like, what's that we wanted? We're like, do we call it Sherpas? Do we call it guides? Like, how do we talk about this connection of kind of bringing you back to the farm? And so we just ended up coming up on Burlap and Barrel. Spices have traditionally traveled across the world, the second oldest industry. So we said that on Shark Tank, by the way, and they cut it. But fair enough. Burlap and barrel, spices travel the world in wooden barrels and in burlap sacks. And if you look closely at our logo, and here I have this box where you can see it, but our logo is kind of this wooden barrel, but almost like hands coming together, kind of all that. So we wanted to do a nod to the history of spices and how they kind of traveled the world. And so we call ourselves Burlap and Barrel. My family, we're Israeli. My parents can't pronounce my company's name, but you live and you learn. But now we're married to it, So that's the origins of Burlap and Barrel. But thank you for asking.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I just want to say again, people know that I try not to have any waste, food waste, I reuse parchment paper. There are some things I have to use that I would rather not, but I have to. And so when I got my spices, this is part of it. There's a cover that's got all kinds of information, but you can actually use this as a spice rack. And these QR codes to tell you more about the spices are really cool, really cool. So you've kind of really thought this through. And I just want to thank you so much, Ori. We learned so much from you today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day. Any Philadelphia people or close to Philly people, I know New Jersey, it's not just Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ori and his partner are going to be at the Drexel Chef Conference. So if you are able to register for the conference in October and come and meet them and meet me too. Actually, my presentation follows your presentation, Ori. So leave that kitchen clean for me.
That's wonderful. And, thank you so much for having me. And check us out at Burlap and Barrel. And thanks again, Fran.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming to spend your afternoon with me or wherever you are in the world. We have an international group. I know that. I hope I'll see you in October for the October live event. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of the day or evening.